made him, and I love him. Hello, welcome back. Today, as part of this YA is an Adult series, we're going to be discussing a series that I've been wanting to do a video on for a while. So I first read this series back in, I think it was 2013, 2014 maybe, sort of just as the last book was coming out, and I read everything up to about halfway through the last book, and then for some reason I just gave up. But then I read this series again at the sort of beginning of the year, sort of February, March, read them all in a week, went to sit down to do a video about it and realised I was far too close to the story. So I took my time in rereading them. I did the video kind of vlog style originally, so I did like parts of it, but I wasn't keen on, let's just put it that way, on how that was turning out, so I decided now to sit down and to do this again. The book series that we're going to be looking at today is Vampire Academy by Richelle Mead. So there's 6 books in the series. You have Vampire Academy, you have Frostbite, Shadow Kiss, Blood Promise, Spirit Bound, and then Last Sacrifice, which is the final one. So if I remember correctly, Vampire Academy came out in 2000. I want to say 2008, so about the same time as Twilight. 2007. So these are kind of a byproduct of the sort of Twilight, early sort of late noughties vampire craze. I don't think they're meant to be. I think possibly they were written, when was Twilight written? 2005? So they might be. I don't know if it's just a coincidence, but they definitely became a byproduct of that Twilight craze, because I think this, I have to admit, I think this series went on a bit too long. But I have a lot of thoughts about this series. I can't understand some of the decisions made, and it's really bugging me, so we're going to talk about it on camera. There will be a little bit of structure to this video. It's not planned, I might just ramble, but my planned structure at the moment, and if this works out then I'll put timestamps in the description below, is to first of all discuss the plot, or the world building, the characters, and the plot of all 6 books. So this video will contain spoilers for Vampire Academy, the entire series. I'll then talk about the actual vampires themselves, and sort of what makes them different, what makes them kind of unique, and what I find really interesting about them. Talk about revolution, talk about love and relationships, and then I'll talk about sex, because the attitude towards sex and love in these books is very, very strange. I'll pop, if I end up doing that, which if you're watching this I will have done, I'll pop timestamps in the description below for you to skip to whatever bit you want. But as I said, this video will contain spoilers throughout the entire thing, starting from probably the first timestamp. Before I get into it, I've set myself a little goal of 50 subscribers by the 1st of January 2022. At the moment of recording I'm at 36, so that's only 14 away. It's only a little mini goal, but I would really appreciate it. You know, subscribe, unsubscribe after the 1st of January, that's fine. I just want to be at 50 by midnight on Hogmanay. So please hit that subscribe button, thank you very much. So to get right into it, we're gonna start off with a little bit of world building. So this the world presented in Vampire Academy is like a society within our larger human society. So you have 2 types of vampires. You have the Moroi, which are like living vampires. They can control elements, normally 1 element each. They drink blood from volunteers, and while they can eat human food, they do need blood eventually to sort of survive. They tend not to kill anybody. They all sort of live quite peacefully. They can go out in the sun for like a wee while before, and it just sort of makes them uncomfortable and a wee bit faint. And like I said, they kind of live peacefully in this big society. Their court system, they have a court system which becomes very important in some of the later books. So basically there are 12 royal Moroi families, and they have royal blood. And these families form a little council, and then when they need to pick a new king or queen, the king or queen is elected by members of the council, which is an interesting system. It's like a mishmash of all sorts of systems. It's very interesting. but it won't be sort of the main focus of this video, I guess. On the other hand, you have Strigoi, which are sort of evil vampires, so they are the more typical undead vampires. They don't, their heart doesn't beat, they can't go out in the sun without sort of disintegrating, they drink blood and kill people, they can't control any elements, they can only do sort of normal vampire things, but they are faster and stronger than most Moroi anyway. Because this is a society within a society, so the Strigoi kind of exist in sort of ones or twos away off, in the sort of fringes of vampire society, I guess. But Moroi, while keeping mostly to themselves, have previously had relations with humans. The history goes that they sort of coexisted together for many centuries until humans, I guess, when science started becoming a thing, and then humans turned against Moroi, and at that point they had to sort of make their own mini society. But as a result of this, Moroi can sleep with and have children with humans, and these sort of half vampire, half human babies are called Dhampirs, or Dompirs. Dompirs, I think it is. So Dompirs are mostly like humans, they don't need blood to survive, they're slightly faster and stronger and a wee bit sort of more, they've got like a better sort of constitution than normal humans do, but they can't use magic, they can't, they're not undead, they're not immortal, anything like that. Dompirs, for the most part, are sort of infertile. They can have children with Moroi and they produce more Dompirs. They cannot have children with other Dompirs, and it doesn't mention what happens if they have children, if they can have children with humans or not. It's sort of never ever considered. But that's basically how this species survives, and there's this rather big debate about whether they need to produce more Dompirs or not. I'll which I'm going to discuss later, but basically Dompirs have a sort of societal role as guardians and protectors of Moroi because they're a little bit sturdier, they're a little bit tougher, and they train to fight Strigoi because the Strigoi want to kill Moroi. Never explained why, apart from the glory of it, I guess. So Moroi are born from other Moroi, but Strigoi are created. So there are two ways to create a Strigoi. Either a Strigoi kills or drinks until drained a Moroi, a Dhampir, or a human, or a Moroi, if drinking from a victim, if they drain all the blood from the victim and kill the victim while drinking their blood, they will then become a Strigoi. So there's two different methods, and one of them's, I guess, like suicide, and one of them's, I guess, like murder, kind of. But yeah, that went on a wee bit longer than I was anticipating. So to get into the characters, our main character is Rose. She is a Dhampir. She's also our narrator, so this is a first person narrative. Her sort of main personality traits, especially in the first book, are that she's rebellious, she's tough, she's a wee bit sassy and sarcastic. It's very much the sort of typical young adult female protagonist that's an absolute badass and quite good at everything. What I liked about this is that it kind of, as the books go on, it kind of subverts that. That is sort of the essence of our main character, Rose. There is a second sort of, not quite main character, but still kind of main character. I guess it's a little bit confusing, but I will explain why in a minute. Lissa. So Lissa is a Moroi. She and Rose are best friends. Lissa is a Royal Moroi, so she is the last in the Dragomir line. So her parents and her brother were killed, and she's now the only Dragomir left. She is pretty diplomatic. She's never, basically the entire attitude towards her is that she's never done anything wrong in her life ever. Her and Rose are joined at the hip. They're also psychically linked for some reason. So Rose can, it's kind of like a one-way bond. So Rose can see through Lissa's eyes. Lissa even is a spirit user, so this is a sort of rare fifth element. This one they kind of just discovered as we go through sort of the end of the first book. It becomes an official thing, but basically that means that she can heal people. That's about it. That's the only thing she can really do. But Lissa is seen as this very kind, very sort of progressive figure. She's very much a politician in training, I guess, and Rose is sort of her opposite, so they kind of balance each other out. And this psychic link is incredibly annoying later on, and I will explain why shortly. You also have Dimitri. So Dimitri is Rose's love interest. Spoiler alert. Dimitri is 7 years older than Rose, and also her teacher. So, do we like that? Don't know. We'll get down to it. Dimitri's a Dampier. He is defined basically by the fact that he's the youngest and best guardian ever, which is why he's been put to teach at a school. But whatever. He is fated to become Lissa's guardian when she graduates school. He's tough and he's smart and he likes westerns and he wears a big western jacket the entire time. That's basically his main sort of personality traits. Also, he's very he's quite stoic. He doesn't he doesn't give in to temptation very easily, and the most important part is that he has this immense, very strong attraction to Rose immediately, and he doesn't act on it, and that's sort of his thing, I guess. And you have Christian. So Christian is another Royal Moroi, except he has been shunned from society because his parents turn Strigoi. And everybody thinks he's evil because of that. They willingly turn Strigoi. So he's a bit of an outcast. He's a fire user. He is Lissa's love interest. And then you have Adrian. And Adrian is another Royal Moroi. He is the nephew of the Queen, Tatiana, who we will get to later. Adrian is also a spirit user. He isn't introduced until book 2. He is an absolute terrible influence on everybody he meets, but he's cool and he's funny, and that's his personality, and he loves Rose, basically. So we have there is also another love triangle in this, which is annoying as hell, but anyway, so that kind of sums up the characters. So now that we know who I'm talking about, we're going to get into the actual, I guess, plots of this. So we start with Vampire Academy. So Rose and Lissa are on the run because Rose believes that Lissa is in danger. Right at the very beginning of this, they are sort of living in a human world, going to a human university or college, wherever they call it in America. They're kind of trying to pass as human, and they're kind of succeeding. But at this point, Rose is still protecting Lissa. So because of their psychic bond, it's almost guaranteed that Rose will become Lissa's guardian once they graduate school. But Rose believed that Lissa was in danger and pulled her out of school early. So they're on the run. They are caught by a group of guardians at the very beginning of this. This group includes Dimitri. So Rose can practically take all of them on except for Dimitri. And an important part of this is that while they've been existing, sort of, in the human world, Lissa has been taking her blood from Rose, which becomes very important later, and I will explain why. But they get dragged back to their school as part of their sort of punishment and catching up with her training. Rose is privately tutored by Dimitri and ends up falling in love with him, as you do. Lissa starts receiving threats and starts seeing dead animals, and she begins to suffer as a result of not using her powers. So this thing about spirit users is that they have to use their powers, otherwise it takes a toll on them, but then the more they use their powers, it takes a toll on them, on their mental health. It's very strange. And basically the theory behind it is that any other elemental Moroi can take their magic from the sort of the environment, but because spirit is healing in that, you have to take your energy from yourself, and it therefore takes a toll on the users. There's also the main antagonist of the first book, Victor Dashkov, who is Lissa's kind of uncle, kind of her sort of mentor guardian since her parents died. It turns out he's the one that's been threatening them and trying to get Lissa, because he knows that Lissa is a spirit user, even though that's not a thing yet, and he has this sort of degenerative disease, and he wants her to continually heal him. And so in order to do that, he kidnaps Lissa and distracts Rose by giving her a lust charm that makes her go after Dimitri, and then Dimitri, they get to the point of almost having sex, but not quite having sex. It's very strange. But Dashkov uses this opportunity to kidnap Lissa. Dimitri and Rose then break that charm and go and rescue Lissa and imprison Victor Dashkov, but Victor convinces his own daughter to turn Strigoi and to attack Rose, but then she's killed by Dimitri. And then Dimitri admits that he has feelings for Rose, but he can't act on them because he's her mentor and they'll both be Lissa's guardians someday, and they need to put her first. And that's kind of where this first book ends. This is going to be a very brief run through, by the way. So frostbite is kind of over Christmas, I guess. Like sort of winter period. Vampires don't really celebrate Christmas, I don't think. The Strigoi attack near the school, and all the students are then taken to a ski resort for their own safety. I don't know why a ski resort is the safest place in the world, but whatever. This is where they meet Adrian, and discover that he's a spirit user like Lissa is. There are other sort of minor characters that come into here. So you have Mason and Eddie, who are guardians and Rose's friends, or trainee guardians and Rose's friends, and then you have Mia, who is another Moroi, and she is a water user, I think. But because the threat of the Strigoi are kind of like closing in, so Mason, Eddie, and Mia decide that it's a good idea to go into the human world to find them and to track them down. And while they're out there, Rose and Christian discover what they've done, and they go after them, and they're all captured by Strigoi at that point. The Strigoi then kill Mason during their escape attempt, and Rose kills her first true Strigoi, which is unusual. Normally they don't kill Strigoi until they're graduated and out of sort of, I guess it's high school, kind of like high school. And Rose gets 2 little tattoos on the back of her neck that indicate that she's killed Strigoi. Third one, Shadow Kiss. This one's my favourite. Basically, most of this is filler. Despite that, it is my favourite up until the only really important things in this is that Rose starts seeing Mason's ghost. And it turns out she's connected to the underworld because she died in the car accident that killed Lissa's parents, but because she was right next to Lissa kind of grabbed hold of her and dragged her out of the spirit world, and since Lissa's basically brought her back from the dead, they have this psychic bond. But because Rose is then connected to the underworld, she starts seeing Mason, or the ghost of Mason, and he keeps trying to warn her, but he can't talk, which is helpful. So, and this literally happens in like the last 100 pages, but Rose and Dimitri start becoming more serious, and they admit that they still have feelings for each other, and then they sleep together, which is a very important point, apparently. Strigoi attack the school, and Dimitri goes off to help, like immediately after they sleep together, Strigoi attack the school, and Dimitri sends Rose off to send the message, to send like the warning, and everybody starts being, they go into kind of like attack or like defense mode. And Rose decides she's not going to go with everybody else. So her and Christian team up to fight the Strigoi that are coming in. They manage to defeat the Strigoi, but they take off a couple of Moroi and Dhampirs and teachers and so on. And so Rose proposes a rescue mission, which Dimitri then brings to the other sort of Dhampirs that have been brought in to help. And they decide to go on this rescue mission, and they go to this cave. And during this cave, Dimitri doesn't make it back out, and it turns out that he's been turned into a Strigoi, which is worse than death. So Rose decides to drop out of school, like several months before she is supposed to graduate, and sets off to Russia to find and kill Dimitri. So the first 3 books after this book, it kind of marks a turning point in Rose and Dimitri's relationship, which is sort of the major focus of the series. Because up until the end of Shadow Kiss, they are you think it's going to be a love story, and then at Shadow Kiss it kind of turns that on its head, and it becomes a story of killing, I guess, doing your utmost to prevent your true love from suffering, and then, as we'll see, that turns it back on its head again. So then we go into Blood Promise. Blood Promise is absolutely insane. You can see from the amount of tabs in this that I thought this was absolutely insane. Let me find my summary. It's here. So Blood Promise. Rose goes to Russia to hunt Dimitri, and she meets an alchemist. And alchemists are humans who know about Moroi, but they've been kind of sworn into secrecy. They have big tattoos. This alchemist's name specifically is Sydney, and what they do most of the time is that they prevent knowledge of Moroi and other vampires from kind of leaking into into human societies. She then goes and spends some time with Dimitri's family because that's where she thinks that he'll go, and that's not where he goes. And while there, she sees a kind of different side to Dampiers, I guess, to what she thought would be normal society. While there, she meets a couple of Dampiers that have dropped out of school, and they go off and they hunt Strigoi by themselves, without any formal training. And she's like, "Oh, I'm better at fighting than you, and I've already killed some, so I'll go too." So they go to, I think it's St. Petersburg they go to, and they're kind of wandering the streets, and Rose, they're gonna go out and hunt Strigoi, after the sun sets. But just as the sun is setting, Rose helps this old lady, cross the street or something, and turns around, and she comes face to face with Dimitri, and they fight, and she stops herself from killing him. I've got pins and nails in my foot. And he captures her. And this is where things take a turn for the worst. So Dimitri is obviously a Strigoi, but for some reason he wants to turn Rose, so he keeps her trapped in the big Strigoi headquarters way out from the city, and drinks her blood to keep her sedated, because when Roy or Strigoi drink blood, the sort of person they're drinking from experiences, like, they kind of like release endorphins, I guess that's would be the technical thing that's happening there, and it's kind of like being drugged, and a lot of people will go back for more, specifically to experience that kind of euphoria again. So he keeps her drugged and sedated while he waits for her to choose to become Strigoi. Rose manages to wean herself off of these drugs and escapes. Dimitri tracks her down, but she stakes him before he kills her, and then she returns to America. Yeah, not good. We're going to discuss this later, more sort of under the sort of levels, but Dimitri then sends her stake back to her in the final sort of chapter, and saying that she was unsuccessful, she still did manage to kill him, and tells her that he'll find her later. So basically, by the end of Blood Promise, her ex-boyfriend has gone from ignoring her to actively hunting her down, except he can't get her at the school or at court because her protection's up, which goes horribly wrong. So, I remember when Spirit Bound in this book is a waste of paper. Oh my god, nothing happens, and yet I still somehow have over a page. The only things that are important in this book are important for the last book. There's no character development. That's not true. That's not true. There is two important things that happen in this book, but we will get there. So Rose and Lissa graduate from school, and then they move to court for their assignments. So Lissa is basically guaranteed to become Lissa's basically guaranteed to become like a politician, because she's the youngest, the only member of her royal family left, and the Queen wants to kind of capitalise on that, so she wants her close. And Rose graduates sort of top of her class and is destined to be a guardian. Rose has a theory on how to convert Strigoi back that she learned in Russia, so she, Lissa, and Eddie decide to break Victor Dashkov out of prison. The vampire prison is very strange. It moves from place to place, so it's constantly in sunlight to prevent people from escaping. However, so when Rose, Eddie, and Lissa go up, it's in Alaska, I think. And then they go back to Vegas, so they've covered their sort of prison break as a weekend away for Lissa's 18th. So they go back to Vegas, and where they encounter Dimitri, and they escape from Dimitri, but Victor Dashkov escapes with his brother, which is the whole reason why they needed to break Victor Dashkov out of prison, because apparently his brother is a spirit user. His brother's name is Robert, I think. His brother is a spirit user, and he has previously supposedly converted a Strigoi back to a Moroi. So they wanted to pick his brains, but they didn't manage to do it. Rose is punished by being assigned to paperwork, so she's off doing paperwork, and Lissa gets other guardians, and then Lissa and Christian are looking at colleges nearby, because that's what the Queen has promised to Lissa if she agrees to do whatever she wants. And while they're away looking at colleges, Lissa and Christian are captured by Dimitri, who kidnaps them because he basically wants to draw Rose in. Don't know. Can't explain it. During the rescue attempt, Lyssa transforms Dimitri back into a dampier, so apparently, I've missed a lot of this wee summary, but basically to do that, a spirit user needs to stake a strigoi with a blessed stake. A stake blessed with all 5 elements, I think it is. Stakes are normally blessed with 4 elements, so she just kind of she gets hold of a stake and she just kind of infuses spirit into it. And then she practices with the guardians that are supposed to be looking after her on this college trip. And she manages to transform Dimitri back into a dampier, but nobody kind of trusts that because this is the first time they've ever sort of seen it happen. So Dimitri's arrested, and when Rose goes in to see him, she just professes her love for him, despite the fact that he kept her drugged and as a prisoner in Russia, and he goes, "No, I can't see you because I absolutely hate the way I treat you," which is fair enough, do you know? Fair enough. And then right at the very end of this, the Queen is murdered and Rose is framed for murder and is accused of murder, and is then going to be executed for treason. It just that's the only reason that this book is here, is to convert Dimitri back and to set that up. And I pass, no idea. So we're going to Last Sacrifice. So Last Sacrifice is not quite the biggest, but it's getting there. Rose's friends break her out of prison. Her, Dimitri, and Sydney, the alchemist, go on the run, and they're supposed to go to this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere and hold themselves up. But Rose decides she doesn't want to do that. So Lyssa is convinced to run for Queen to slow down the proceedings, which means she has to go through a couple of trials, and she has to. She knows it's pointless because she's the last member of her family, which means she can't have a vote on the council because you need to have at least one more other living family member. So she can't be voted in because you need a family member to crown you, I guess, as king or queen. But she can't run in the proceedings. It's just the end part. She can't be voted in. So she decides to run, and it'll cause up basically a big stir, and she'll buy Rose some time. Rose, Dimitri, and Sydney try to track down Lyssa's long lost half sibling, and during this, in order so that she can become queen, but while doing this, they come across Victor and Robert Dashkov, or Victor Dashkov and Robert, whatever his last name was, I can't remember. Lyssa, Christian, and Adrian try to solve the Queen's murder, which it doesn't go well. Victor then kidnaps Jill, who is Lyssa's half sibling, who we met in, I think it was book 2. Yeah. And then Rose kills him, which she is very, very upset about. So then Rose and Dimitri sleep together again, and then they figure out who the murderer is, unrelated to them sleeping together. Lyssa is disqualified from leadership vote because she doesn't have any family, but then Rose and Dimitri appear with Jill right on time, just as always planned. And Rose announces that the murderer is Christian's aunt, who was in love with... She didn't like the Queen, so she murdered the Queen, but she framed Rose because she's in love with Dimitri, and Dimitri picked Rose over her. So there's like 2 love triangles, I guess. Christian's aunt then shoots Lyssa, but Rose takes the bullet instead. But Rose survives, but because she's kind of become so close to death again, she doesn't die, I guess, but it removes the psychic bond between her and Lyssa. And then Lyssa becomes queen, and then Rose and Dimitri gets assigned to be Christian's guardian, and Rose gets assigned to be Lyssa's guardian, obviously, and then Rose and Dimitri can be together. Ta-da! Right, so that's a summary of all of the books. That's how this one ends. Happily ever after, everybody's good. Christian's aunt's in jail, I guess. It does leave a couple of things open, which I will get to in a moment, but that's the summary. My god, that was a whirlwind. I forgot how messy this is. And that isn't even all of it. That's just the important bits. So I think they're alright. The character voice is strong. Character voice is annoying at places, but the character voice is very strong. You really get a sense of who Rose is and what she stands for without it being explicitly told to you. There is a deterioration throughout. Well, actually, no. Vampire Academy's like here, Frostbite's like here, Shadow Kiss is like here, and then Blood Promise is kind of like here, and then it goes way downhill. So there is a deterioration through the books. They kind of get better, and then like I said, there's that kind of halfway mark and things just go downhill. So I think if it had been a trilogy, it would have been a lot better, or maybe yeah, like a trilogy. But I tend to see them as two separate trilogies that are kind of just linked. There is a bit of a time jump between Shadow Kiss and Blood Promise, which does not help. But yeah. there is, I do think they maybe should have stopped after Shadowkiss. Shadowkiss is still my favourite, despite absolutely nothing happening. But you know, what can we do about it? I think a lot of the characters are unique. A lot of the characters are enjoyable. As you might have noticed when I was trying to go through the plot, there are bits where, especially in sort of the last 3 books, the last 3 books especially, Rose and Lissa are entirely separated. But as it's first person, you get Rose. You obviously get Rose's story, but then you also get Lissa's story, which is a bit strange for it being first person because it never leaves Rose's sort of point of view. But what's actually happening in these scenes is that Rose kind of goes into a wee trance, and she goes into Lissa's head, and Lissa basically whatever Lissa's doing is explained through that way, and I found that incredibly annoying. Oh my god, I hated it so much. Most of the time they were distractions from the story. I think it would have been a lot better if if either it was told in third person, or if they had like sort of like catch-ups, I guess. I absolutely hated it. I mean, it is interesting to know Lissa's side of the story. However, it being told through Rose's point of view is very strange because she's not actually there, but she's giving her opinion on things. And it just for some reason it just put me off. I don't know why, I can't explain it, but it put me off for some reason. Oh, some other important things that I forgot to mention. At the end of Shadowkiss, when Rose decides to go to Russia to find Dimitri, she needs money, so she goes to Adrian, and because Adrian is the nephew of the queen, he's really rich, and he's still older. She has a thing for older men. He's still older, and she asks for money, and he says, I'll give you money, but only if you don't find him, or if you come back, then you'll date me. And she goes, yeah, that's fine. So he basically blackmails her. But then there's other issues that I'll discuss in a minute. With that sort of love triangle anyway. I did like the way it ended, sort of open-ended. I mean, there is a follow-up. I don't know if you can see it, it's there. There is like a follow-up series, 6 books again, which follows Sydney the Alchemist and Adrian, who eventually get together, I think. Also, the audiobooks I listened on my reread this year. I listened to the audiobooks of Last Sacrifice and of Spiritbound. I think it was Spiritbound. The audiobooks are quite good, very good. Like, that's exactly how I imagine Rose would sound. So the audiobooks are good. You should listen to the audiobooks. The actual vampires themselves. This is based on real folklore, so sort of folklore from sort of Slavic regions, so Slovakia, Romania, that sort of area. They have vampires in their folklore that are called strigoi, and they're not exactly the same. They are kind of like vampires, but a lot of it was just things that the dead did that kind of freaked people out. So they used to. I actually have a post on Strigoi on my blog, which I will link down in the description down below. But I did think it was really interesting that that Richelle Mead chose to take, because it is the books are very heavily sort of invested in sort of Russian and kind of Slavic culture. There are like bits and pieces pulled from it, which I thought was a really interesting take, even though it is sort of transplanted into America. But to use Strigoi as the basis, I don't know if there's any basis for Moroi in sort of that comes from the same sort of folklore. There is like 9 different types of Strigoi, if I remember correctly. But as the details will be in the blog post below. It was a while since I did it, but yeah, I didn't think that good versus evil vampires was particularly unique. I don't know if this is where it started from. I have seen several things since then. But yeah, I thought the idea of a half-breed was interesting. Better than the way they did it in Twilight. Definitely better than the way they did it in Twilight. The idea of revolution is nothing new to YA novels, or the genre as a whole. I mean, you have, the Hunger Games, which is all about revolution. What the hell's it called? They made a series out of it. Shadow and Bone, the sort of Grisha trilogy, and Six of Crows, which are kind of about revolution. I'm sure Throne of Glass is about revolution at some point. Court of Thorns and Roses is kind of about revolution. It's not abnormal for YA books. I'm just looking at my bookshelf, seeing what else I can see. I'm sure City of Bones is surely about revolution, probably. What else is there? I don't know, but it's not a new idea. Sort of rebelling against that's kind of what set YA apart. I guess in the beginning was rebelling against the way things were done. So there's nothing new about Revolution. What I liked about the way that Revolution was presented in Vampire Academy is that it was a different angle. You know, you have things like the Hunger Games and like Divergent, where your main character, what was her from Divergent? Triss, and Triss and Katniss were sort of figureheads for this revolution. They were really in charge of this revolution. So what I liked about Vampire Academy was that Rose wasn't in charge. She wasn't the figurehead. She was just right hand man to the figurehead of this revolution, who turned out to be Lyssa. And I mean, her reluctance going into it wasn't anything kind of new, but she wasn't entirely reluctant. You know, she'd shown interest in it before, and it's not just thrown in at the last minute. You all the entire way through, you have sort of messages of the upheaval of the old ways. So it used to be that Dompiers would only ever be the ones that were fighting. But if they wanted, then they could stay at home and have kids and make more little Dompiers. And Moroi were always sort of the ones, despite the ones having magic that can be used offensively, Moroi were always the ones that kind of sat off to one side and didn't really sort of, you know, they were to be protected. They weren't protectors. The whole idea of so yeah, that gets turned on its head the more you go on. So, you know, Christian and Mia wanting to fight Strigoi and teaching themselves and others how to fight Strigoi. There's a subplot in Shadowkiss where a group of Moroi get together and they have to fight each other, and that's actually what brings down the sort of protective barriers around the school, is because they're exchanging magic right beside the barrier, because that's the only place they can do it in secret. You have kind of the inclusion of a new element that can be used offensively. So the entire introduction of spirit sort of falls into that sort of revolution category. Even the idea of turning a Strigoi back into either a Moroi or a Dampier is revolutionary. And at all these points, when anything like this is introduced, you have push back against it. So, you know, there's the last two books deal with an age decree, at which point the sort of council decide that in order to protect themselves from the Strigoi, they have to make Dampiers graduate at 16 instead of 18. So they're putting literal children into the battlefield, and obviously there's pushback against this, but the only real way to do it is to sort of shift the system entirely. So if the system's not working, you can't just change it, you need to move it entirely. You need to change it completely. And that is something that's really prominent in these books, and I really liked it. You know, new attitudes towards things. Sort of there's an entire part in the last book where Rose and Dimitri and Sydney go to this it's a kind of a Moroi camp outside of the sort of societal system, where Moroi and Dampiers and humans are living side by side, and they live in caves underground. And it is seen as a very backward kind of community, but at least it's there, at least it's present. There are other options, even if they aren't presented as entirely desirable. But then at the same time, the revolution that's presented in Vampire Academy is one of doing things the proper way. There's no protests, there's no fighting. In the final book, in Spirit Band, when the Queen dies, it presents an opportunity for someone else to take over, I guess, and that opens up a real opportunity for change. And there is pushback against Lyssa when she goes for it, but at the same time, she has loads of support. You know, people support her because of what her ideals are and because of what she stands for, and it kind of shows that things can change. And I'm sure this was relevant in 2012, whenever the last book came out, but it's more relevant now than ever as well. So I kind of liked how that was present and is still relevant today. So I don't understand why you can have all these open-minded attitudes to political change and still have incredibly old-fashioned ideas about sex and relationships. I don't know. So in terms of love, you have this really nice kind of healthy relationship in Lissa and Christian. You know, they fight occasionally and then they make up and they respect each other. And then you have the absolute shitfire that is Rose and Dimitri and Adrian. I don't understand. Rose falls in love with Dimitri, which he's her teacher. He's 7 years older than her. There's a bit of it's a bit dodgy, but at the same time, because when they meet, she's 16, 17, and he's 23, 24, something like that. So that's a bit dodgy to begin with. Literally her teacher in a position of power over her, and he stops this. He stops this relationship in its tracks because he knows it's wrong. But there's something about her, and he just has to give in eventually. Not to mention that he literally kidnaps and drugs her in the 4th book. Like, I don't understand. And she comes back and she's like, oh, it's fine though, because you're a Strigoi. That doesn't change what he did. And he understands that, which is the really interesting part of this, is that a lot of the attitudes towards the relationships in this book are Rose's own personal ideas. And she thinks it's perfectly fine that Dimitri did all that to her because he was literally an evil vampire and he had no choice in the matter, when he knows that he had choice in the matter. And his stance on that and the way he stands out on that is very, very interesting and very not redeemable, but very interesting. The way that Rose treats Adrian, on the other hand, is shocking. Adrian really loves her. He's still older than her, and she only goes out with him because he basically blackmails her or bribes her with money. And then when she should break it off, she doesn't break it off, and that results in her absolutely cheating on him with Dimitri in the last book, and then breaking his heart. And then, so at the end of Last Sacrifice, you have this really unresolved tension between Adrian and Rose, and Adrian hates them all. And, fair play. Fair play. And this then leads on to the ideas about sex, because while the sort of ideas about love and relationships are very clearly Rose's, the attitudes towards sex in this book are they're widespread, they're strongly founded, they're very, very, they're very clearly not Rose's own ideals, and it seems to come from the author, and it's absolutely bizarre. Really outdated attitudes. If there's literally from the very first book, there's this introduction of the term blood whore, and a blood whore is someone who, I can't believe this is a term, a well-used term in a young adult series to begin with, but a blood whore is somebody who lets a Moroi drink from them while they have sex. And it's, even the term, the language and the terminology used automatically positions it as a shaming women sort of thing, because whore is a term that is normally referred to with women. And as it goes on, that idea is reinforced, because Rose is referred to as a blood whore. There's a scene in the first book where, because it gets out that Lissa was drinking from Rose to sustain herself, and instead of this being seen as a kind of a, I guess, as a survival mechanism, it's seen as this really sort of dirty kind of lesbian relationship between them, which is not good. Oh my god, even for 2007, I mean, come on. So you have this kind of, I guess, homophobia straight out between them. But then there's this scene in the first book where Rose is kind of, she sneaks out of her dorm during the day, which is their night because they're vampires, and she goes to meet this Moroi, and he goes to, they're kind of, getting it on, and he goes to bite her, and she pulls away, and he goes, oh, I thought you were a blood whore. Which is so wrong. There's literally no development in her attitude towards sex at all, at any point. And also, to go back to this blood whore thing, it's incredibly classist as well, because blood whore predominantly refers to Dompiers, or humans, who are seen as below the Moroi because they're not as good as the Moroi, which is insane. And even when, during Blood Promise, when they never actually, Rose and Dimitri never actually have sex while Dimitri's a Strigoi, but they come very close, and he bites her and he drinks from her while they're doing what essentially amounts to foreplay. And, I mean, she refers to herself as a blood whore. It's ridiculous. And she goes to Russia, and there are Dompiers in Russia who choose not to fight. They choose to stay home. They choose to have children, which is fine. but they're having children with these women are having children with Moroi, who come, impregnate Dhampirs, and then leave again. And that's seen as horrifying. It's seen as and to be honest, it's not ideal. It's not to look through the lens of like monogamy. It's not ideal, but the way that Rose reacts to this is just absolutely insane. She just absolutely can't wrap her head around why anybody would ever want to do this. There's this absolutely weird stigma surrounding it. She doesn't have sex with Adrian. She stops him, but she lets him bite her, and that's apparently a stepping stone in their relationship, I guess. That happens right at the end of Spiritbound, right before she's accused of killing the queen. And Dimitri sees it, and that makes him jealous, and it's like, come on, he can't even, he's a Dhampir, he can't even bite her. It's just, the actress, I can't even explain how annoyed I am about the actress' sex in this book, and it doesn't develop. There's no character development with regards to Rose's attitude towards sex. She views it as this weird stigma at the start, and she thinks it's really weird that Lissa's already had sex, even though she hasn't, because she can't, because she's pure, I guess. There is this sort of issue of purity as well. She can't have sex because she's if she has sex with somebody, then she'll get pregnant, and she'll be she won't be able to be a guardian if she has sex and has a child, because then her only purpose will be to have sex and have more children and have more Dhampirs. It's insane. There's no sort of way, like, her own mother is a guardian who had her with this Moroi guy who shows up later on. He's one of the best characters in the entire series, honestly. He's funny as hell. Her own mother had her and then just decided to go back to work, so she knows it's possible, but she has this really bizarre, like, stigma around it in her head. Oh my god, I can't even explain this. I'm gonna have to end it there. This was not very analytical because I just ranted about outdated sex. But this is to give to teenagers. Oh my god. Anyway, right. I'm done. I'm done. Despite all this, I think they're fun books. I don't think they hold up to today's standards in YA and sort of the YA genre. But I think they're fun. I think they're, as long as you don't take them too seriously, I think they're pretty good. They're pretty good vampire fiction. They're pretty good examples of interesting takes on revolution. They have very strong characters, very strong character voices. I still like them, and I would still read them again, even if they're gonna piss me off. But yeah, have you read Vampire Academy? Let me know in the comments below what you think. If you have any strong opinions like I do. There is also a film that was released in 2014. I think it was supposed to be a series of films like Twilight, but it absolutely flopped. Oh my god, it's the worst film I've ever seen. And yet I would watch it again in a heartbeat. So if you want me to do a comparison of the film to the book, or if you want me to sit and watch the film and analyse it like I did with my Cat in a Hat video, except presumably better done because I'll actually be able to get a copy of this one, let me know. I'll quite happily do that. Can't think of a better way to waste my time. And yeah, again, if you guys would love to subscribe, I'm trying to hit 50 subscribers before Hogmanay, which is in like 5 days now, less than a week. Yeah, please, if you don't mind, hit that subscribe button for me. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. I have a playlist with 2 other videos like this in it. So I previously did Twilight, and I previously did the Raven Cycle. I have to pick something to do next. My options are A Court of Thorns and Roses, Throne of Glass, which I've never read the entire way through, or Divergent. So let me know which one of them you'd like to see next. Thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.